Go. Welcome back to Contacts. We are joined today by Andrea Sampson, who is the CEO and founder of the Talk Boutique and Thought Leader Academy. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks so much, Justin. I'm really excited to be here with you.
Fantastic. So as we were discussing offline here, we're going to dive into something different, audience. Andrea is let's say you're an expert, but you're definitely a leader in the space of storytelling and coaching communication strategy. So why don't you give us a little background in what all of that means in regards to our listenership and where the areas in society where you're making a difference.
Sure. So, I started my career in advertising and spent almost 25 years working as a senior leader in advertising, and realized one day that I was an idealist in a capitalist world, and it was time for me to leave that world. And so I had the very good fortune to make my way into the TED world. Of course, we all love TED Talks, and I did as well. And what I learned, and this was in the early days of the TEDx world, was that it was all volunteer. So I began volunteering for TEDx, and I became a speaker's coach for them and learned the art of storytelling. And, advertising is a storytelling medium. And so I already had a background in it. But TED is a whole other level. And I think the difference between what I did in advertising and what I did at TED was that we weren't just storytelling to sell something, we were storytelling for understanding. We were using story as context. And I was working with some of the smartest people in the world, quite frankly, people who are working on building and creating futures for us that were better than the present that we had. And yet none of us knew about it. And that was why we loved TED so much. We were learning about these things that were happening. And so I made it my mission to actually help people do exactly that. Those who are creating change in the world, those experts and change makers who are actually doing the work, I wanted to build something to help them get now. And so that's what Talk Boutique came from. And then eventually I started to learn that we needed even something more for those who are a little earlier in their progress. And that was where the Thought Leader Academy came. So today I work with those very people and help turn them into thought leaders by teaching them the art and the science of storytelling.
Fantastic. So what's the difference between the Talk Boutique and the Thought Leader Academy?
So Talk Boutique is really where we work with more seasoned thought leaders, where they're ready to be out speaking on public stages. We have a speakers bureau. We work with large corporates, working with corporate leaders who are ready to take their thought leadership out. The Thought Leader Academy is where all of our coaching products live. So we work with those who are early on in their area of expertise, who are wanting to develop into thought leadership. And so the Thought Leader Academy is both a platform as well as a coaching methodology around helping them to become the thought leaders that they want to become. So to gain that acclaim through communications, through branding, and through community development, all through the lens of shifting their mindset from being an expert or a change maker into understanding that it's thought leadership that actually changes our world.
And that is, I'm assuming, because being able to come up with these ideas and concepts then has to be sold in some capacity in regards to how they market, advertise, and land whatever this new thing they've come up with.
Has to be understood, first of all. And I think that's one of the biggest differences, right? So there are a lot of experts out there. We know them all, we can name experts. The challenge often is we don't understand what they're saying. They're an expert in whatever area of science or technology or medicine or whatever it is they do. And they speak in languages often that are very foreign to us because it's filled with jargon and filled with, technical aspects of it. When we use story, we make it more accessible, and we can show not what you know, but why and how you know it. And it's the why and how that's way more interesting than the what.
So how would you then coach day-to-day communications versus big picture landing a conceptual idea, right? So for example, I was just away at a camp in the last week, and a big part of what they do is they spend time in the classroom. And part of making the messages sticky are telling these little vignettes, and each of the directors is at a different level in their journey of being an elite storyteller, right?
Hmm.
But at the same time, I find myself frustrated often with both myself and the receiver of messages when there's misses, right? And so, how do you blend in the day to day this concept? And what are the tools? What are the things that you should be focusing on when there are miscommunications happening? Where it's like, hey, I thought I said I wanted these printed, not embroidered, yet here they are, they're back embroidered. Like, where was the miss? Talk a little bit about strategies for the day to day, the interpersonal conversations, and then we'll circle back to kind of the big picture idea of storytelling on the grander scale.
So when we're looking at those day to day, I mean, just the example you gave, embroidered versus printed. Well, the first thing is um, in the communication. So, one of the things that most of us are really, really bad at,
Mm-hmm.
and it's both as a communicator, as the speaker or the listener, is the listening.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Listening is probably one of the biggest challenges we all have. We're busy, we're distracted, we've got 1,000 different things pulling at us. And so, in the communication of something as simple as that, hey, go and get this printed, it's what we're not doing in that is we're not spending the time to listen. And it's on both sides. So what is it that's being requested? Has it been received? Have is there some acknowledgement of the expectation, and have we circled back on it? So this is these happen every day. We've all run into that exact same thing. And so one of the challenges that we have, especially as communicators, is number one, slow down. Slow down. You have to, first of all, know what it is you're asking for. Because have you asked for it in a way where it can be received?
Mm-hmm.
You may have said it in a way that you thought was clear, but the language, the words you used, the way in which you communicated may not have been. On the other side, so what is the reciprocation of it? So in a process of communication, we encode and we send and then we decode, right? That's actually the communication process. So when you're encoding, you as the communicator, first of all, have got to think about the language, the words you're using. That's an encoding.
Mm-hmm.
And how are you sending it? Is it going across in a way where it's being interrupted? If it is, your encoding needs to even be more precise.
Mm-hmm.
Then on the other side, there's the role of the receiver. How are they decoding it, and how are they confirming back to you that they understand? So in that example, what I would suggest is that the request, I don't know how it was given, but what probably was needed somewhere in there was a clear communication of the expectation and a clear acceptance of the expectation. Somewhere in there, it fell down.
Mm-hmm.
Could have been as simple as send back an email that says, yeah, I'm going to go get it printed. And you would have said, no, not print it, get
Mm-hmm.
it, embroidered or whatever. So in those types of things, it's understanding the role of both the sender and the receiver, right? That's what communications is.
Mm-hmm.
When we get into storytelling, now there's also in there, somewhere in there, there's stories being told. There's this story that you have in your mind of who you are as the coach,
Mm-hmm.
what your role is, and what is expected of you by the people you coach. On the other side of it is a story being told for the person who is receiving that communication of who they are, what they believe about themselves. And in some way, that might be getting in the way of them actually hearing the words you're saying to them.
Mm-hmm.
Story plays a big role in the sending and receiving. And so understanding the mindset as well as the encoding process is really important.
So how do you see that being played out day to day if you were to put yourself in the shoes of an athletic coach and their athletes and or their staff and or the media, whomever? What bare minimum suggestions do you have that's like, look, at the end of the day, you need to do X, Y, and Z to become a more efficient communicator?
Well, and you just nailed it. It is exactly that. So when you are in a role of authority, and especially in a role where you're moving people through a process, you're establishing what is it you want them to do today or tomorrow or this week or this month. What is the one thing? You only get one thing. We know this, right? When we try and do multiple things, it fails. So you've got to do one thing at a time. And so when you're communicating that, be clear on what you're communicating. What's the one thing you want? Now, that one thing probably is layered. There's probably many steps to take to get to that one thing, but the one thing has to be clear so that the steps can take you to the one thing. So when you establish what that idea is, what is that core thing that you want as an outcome? And then what's really key here, and this is where I think storytelling is really most impactful, is that when you have clearly identified what it is you want as an outcome, use story to contextualize that outcome. Build up. So in your case, maybe what your outcome is, we want to win the regional championships. Perhaps that's the outcome. Now, that's a big outcome. Mm-hmm. And it requires a whole lot of steps. Mm-hmm. But in order to get to that outcome, you've got to have every kid on the team really bought into it, mm-hmm. and believing that they're a part of that. Mm-hmm. So you need to tell the story of how you won. Mm-hmm. Not the story of how you're going to win, but the story of how you won. So you build a vision that helps every kid see themselves in it. Mm-hmm. And at the end of it, you're ending it with, this is, these are the steps we took to, to do this very thing. Now that story becomes something that each one of them finds a piece of themselves in, and they have to tell a story to themselves. Mm-hmm. And this is, when we're in storytelling, and actually when we're, the mindset of this is really essential. And it's something that we take from acting, which is something that we call stage status, but it's a completely different thing than socioeconomic status. But what it really is, status is speaking to what I think about me, what I think you think about me, and what you actually think about me. And the beauty of those three things, and think about those as a triangle. Mm-hmm. What we know to be true about any triangle is if you define two sides of it, the third side gets defined for you. Mm-hmm. Well, in what I just said to you, there are two things that you're in control of. One, what I believe about myself. Mm-hmm. Two, what I believe that you believe about me. Mm-hmm. Those two things I'm in total and complete control of, which means I actually can define what you think about me. Mm-hmm. And so when we're looking at kids, especially who are maybe a little bit nervous about their own ability to live up to high level competition, those first two pieces are the areas to work on. And that is the story that we're telling ourselves, because a big part of the story that we're telling ourselves is, I think that you think I'm not good enough. I think that you think that I'm going to fail. Mm-hmm. Maybe I think I'm going to fail, maybe, but often it's the second one, because we think that other people, we think that their opinion of us is formed by them only. But in fact, it's informed by how we show up to that conversation.
Mm-hmm. All right, there's a lot of places to go with this, and I'm going to keep it focused on how it can be utilized within this space. So if you were to talk about that last piece, right, which is, you think that I think you might not be good enough. Well, you might not be. And, as a coach, I definitely have that opinion. So-and-so is not good enough to compete and to perform and to participate in this particular segment. So how do you take this tool of the story and how do you utilize it to bring people along to build confidence that is not irrational confidence, but like legitimate belief in what they are capable of doing, and right, to be proud of that contribution versus, well, I think I can do X, even though there's no evidence to support that. And because I'm not getting to do X, I'm bitter about my role as Y.
So when we look at that, so yes, you're right. There are, everybody has differing abilities. We all have the ability to do the things that we believe we can do. The question is, are you showing up and doing the work to do those things? Right. And so it isn't whether you can do them, it's whether you are doing them. And so from a coaching perspective, that's your job to bring back to them that reflection, right? And that's what you obviously do. You're not showing up, you're not doing the work, you're not good enough as a result of not having done the work. And so, first of all, if they're on the team, they probably wouldn't be on the team if they didn't have the capability of doing it. The belief, so really what we're talking about is a belief motivation cycle, right? So they have a belief that they can do something, they're motivated to do it, they do it, they do the thing, and then they evaluate their performance. You evaluate their performance. Now, in the performance, this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because we don't always have a good day, right? We all have bad days. That doesn't make us bad performers. It makes us, it was a bad performance. So what's the difference between you're not capable of doing this and that was a bad performance? Right. And so that's the tricky part of this, because number one is as you are determining who is on that team, you are in fact going, you're suited to this. I believe you can do this. And I believe you're showing up, and therefore you get to be on the team, versus you believe you can do this. I can see you have the capability to do it, but you're not showing up. Therefore, you're not on the team. Right. So you've done that. And that's really the difference, right? Like, it's not that I don't believe you can do it. I believe you're not showing up to do it. So I don't know if you can do it. And from the kids' perspective, that perspective piece, what I think of myself and what I believe you believe about me, the dichotomy of that is often because they're not doing the work, right? So they're not showing up, they're not doing the thing, and they know they're not, and therefore they're putting it on you that you don't believe in them, when in fact, the piece of it is they don't believe in themselves. So it's not even getting to you. So it's not that I believe I can do it. It's that I actually don't believe I can do it. And I hope you believe I can do it. That's what's going on in their mind. Right. And of course, it's not true. So they don't make it to the team. But if we go to that second example of those who make it to the team, and the difference between a bad performer versus a bad performance, that's where the piece is being able to objectively look at every performance, as opposed to making every performance be the entire category, right? And so the belief motivation cycle, and this is something taken from positive psychology, which says we have to allow ourselves to step outside of ourselves and get into what's called an objective observer position, where we can see our performance without seeing it as who we are. And that's of course really difficult for children, because it's a pretty meta thing to do, to go, the way I perform is not who I am. It's just something that I did once. Now, the next time I have another choice. And there are many things that I can do before that performance, but I can learn from this bad performance. What did I do wrong? Did I go partying the night before? Did I not do my, the required rehearsals or practice that would get me to that place? What are the things I can do differently the next time?
Yeah. And sometimes it's just about work, right? I mean, you don't need somebody operating on you that's first year med school, right? You want them to have had their residency. You want them to have reps. And sometimes a lot of it isn't, I believe I can do it. It's like, you don't have the reps yet, and you need to make it second or, automatic.
Well, and even in that, so like, I love the way you said that, like, you just need the reps. And we actually say this a lot when we're working with speakers, right? The first time you step on a stage to give a talk, it is not going to be your best performance. It really is not. You're going to get better over time. And maybe that sucks for the first audience that you're in front of, but to make sure that that's not the large audience you want it to be. That's why comics go out to small comedy clubs and test out all of their activity, right? So their jokes and things. So it's the same in the sports world. Like, you're first year, whatever, you're not great yet. You're not, look, there are some who right out of the gates are, but I mean, that's 1 in a million. We all know that. And we want to be it, of course, but even they had to do the work to get there. Wayne Gretzky didn't like show up one day and be a great hockey player. I mean, he'll tell you the story that it was, a lot of work to get to where he got to.
Okay, let me ask this, and I'm now super interested in how this idea of storytelling can be applied and what the steps would be. Because again, sitting in these sessions, listening to these dudes that are elite storytellers, listening to one of my colleagues who's our golf coach that writes and tells these phenomenal stories on stage in front of the whole school that, builds anticipation, has a climactic moment, all of this other thing. So where do you see the larger traditional arc of story playing into the day-to-day adventure of teaching and coaching? And I don't necessarily just mean like, okay, we're going to deliver this lesson on writing today, but like, where do you see it coming into play to build and maintain anticipation and engagement? But then also, like, what are the steps, right? How do you lay this out if you are a beginner of this,
Yeah.
as you work towards becoming a master storyteller?
Well, there are many, many different storytelling frameworks out there, and all of them are good. The challenge with many of them is they're quite complex. And so one of the things I like to do is I like to use a framework that is really simple, because when you're telling story as part of an overall message, being able to remember that framework easily is really important. So we use something called the story spine. And the story spine is a 5-step framework to telling a story. And it will give you and if you're a good storyteller, a great story every time. And the way you do it, you're using, story is hardwired in our brain. As humans, we are hardwired for story. And so when we're telling a story, we're not just using words. What we're doing is we're actually exciting our brains. Why is that important? Because our brains are associative and predictive. And they're associative. So what happens when I'm telling you my story, your brain is filling in the blanks with your own memories. So you're seeing yourself in my story, and it's predictive. So it's automatically wanting to know what's going to happen next. It's always slightly ahead of what I'm telling you. So knowing that, what you want to do is you want to work with the brain and give it what it loves. And what it loves is emotional sensory language that continuously lights it up. Okay. It lights it up with electrical activity. What that's doing is it's creating memory within the brain. It's creating anticipation. It's creating those associations so that people remember the story. But more important, remember the idea you're putting inside of that story. So first of all, before you tell the story, what idea are you holding inside of that story? What is it you want to get across? What is the point of the story? So know that first. You don't start with the point, you lead to the point, but you need to know where you're going, because think about that as a destination point for you, for the story, because you're going to lay breadcrumbs along the way.
Okay.
Now, once you know what that is, find a story that you connect with, that's from your life in some way, whether you've had personal experience with it, whether it's something you personally connect to. When you're telling a story, tell it from the inside, as if you're living it, because what you feel, I feel. So you start off, and so the 5 elements of story, of the story spine, and I'm going to put there's like 5.5, because the point lives inside of that. So I'll show you where that idea lives. So it starts off with the environment. Where is the story taking place? That is the sense of place. Now, it's not I was down the road. I was on a beautiful, beautiful road covered in trees. A sunny day, the sun was dappling through those trees, and you could smell the grass. Now, what I'm doing, you can feel it, right? I'm giving you a visual. You can see that beautiful tree-covered road. You can feel the sun coming through those trees, maybe on your face. You can smell the grass. We're lighting up the brain right now. That's important. You're in that place. You're also being specific. Maybe they're maple trees. They're not just trees, they're maple trees. Give us some elements that we're going to remember. So we start with the environment. Where is the story taking place? Next, we have characters. Characters are who are in the story. They have names and they have backstories. Now, depending on how long you've got to give, so you can build up that environment, you can give us lots of elements, and then you can talk about who is in that story.
Mm-hmm.
There was me and Justin, we were just going for a walk.
Mm-hmm.
I just met Justin. He's a coach. We were talking about storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
But now, we know a little bit about you. We know your name. We know me, know a little bit about me. Now, we had just met. So, we're going down this road, we're walking, it's a beautiful day. And I was helping Justin to understand the elements of story so he could work with his students better on a day-to-day basis and create just stronger communications. That's the issue, opportunity, or conflict of the story. So now we've got the environment, the characters, and the issue, opportunity, or conflict. So that's the third piece. Now, often like some people would say, oh yeah, I was going for a walk with Justin and we were talking about storytelling. Okay, that's the same story, but you can see how one was interesting and was kind of, I'm just going to ignore it. Okay. So now that we've got those three pieces and we've built it up, what we want is a tension point in the story. We call this a raising of the stakes. Now, so this could be, often it's the and then moment, something happens. So what we want in a story as we get to the issue, conflict, or opportunity, I'm helping Justin become a better communicator with his students. And then he gets a call. He gets a call and he finds out that his team has just been nominated for to be maybe to open some big, I don't know, some big sporting event. I'm not very sporty, so you can tell I have no idea what would be important in your world. But but you get a call and suddenly this team who is nascent, who is early on in their their training, suddenly they've got this big game that they've got to go to, and they've got to be able to show up and perform, and not just perform, but Justin now has to get them ready from a mindset standpoint because they don't believe they're ready. So now I could have another, and then I could add in another and another, depending on how long I'm going, right? But it's at this moment, in the and then moment, where you've got your audience to a place where what's going to happen? They're sitting a bit on the edge of their seat. We've now got them at a place where they're understanding all these things that are happening. This is the moment you put your point in there. What is it? Storytelling is the way in which that we can help kids believe in themselves better, because when they hear the story of themselves told to them through a lens that is both believable as well as motivating, they'll show up better, they'll act better, and they'll do things that they never thought they could. So that would be, putting an idea inside of, a very short story. But you can see, and then if you were doing an entire presentation, you would go into breaking down that idea, right? You wouldn't come back to that moment until you're ready to close off the entire talk. You'd leave the audience hanging. You want to do that because what you've done is you've got them to an emotional state. You've gotten them to a place in that story where they want to know more, but you've delivered an idea and now they've associated that idea with that story. So when you come back, you might tell other parts of that story. You may come back to other stories all throughout your presentation. But when you're ready to close it off, that's when you go back and you go, that day on that walk, when Andrea and I were walking down that tree-lined street, here's what I knew. And now you finish it off and you tell us what happened and you reiterate that same idea, because now that's what you're leaving your audience with. And then you would end on a call to action. So, as you do this, here's what I want you to do. So the 5 elements, the environment, the characters, the issue, conflict, or opportunity, the raising of the stakes, the and then moment, and then finally the conclusion. What happened? How did it all end? Those are the 5 points. after the raising of the stakes, that's the 4.5 element, which is insert your idea. Make it be associated to a tension point in your story. And that's the elements of telling a good story. And it's really easy. Use that. You can use that when you're telling a story at a cocktail reception, and you'll actually have a great story.
Right. Well, it sounds easy and it sounds terrifying at the same time. And while I obviously it's going to take a ton of practice, taking the framework and applying it, I'm also curious in endeavors like mine, both as a coach and a teacher, where you very rarely get to stand on stage and tell these long, elaborate deals. How do you intersperse this concept into the smaller lessons that you are teaching, or when you are engaging in the day-to-day ebb and flow of classroom management, right? You just can't just stop and spend 15 minutes telling these stories every day, and you're not necessarily going to get where you need to get within the curriculum.
So you can, though, because it can be incorporated right into the curriculum, right? So if you think about this, and we do this naturally, you probably do it naturally, but you don't notice it. You come to a moment where somebody's not understanding and you go, well, it's like this, and you tell them a little story, right? So do that before you get to the point of not understanding. Right into the curriculum, build in these little stories that become, so because you as a teacher, as an educator, know the elements that you're trying to get across to your students. And often those elements are fairly complex. And you have to decode it. You have to break those elements down. But if you start off with a story that contextualizes that complex idea, they get that right away, because we, as humans, we love that, right? As soon as you give me context, I get it. And that's often what's missing with complex ideas, is the context that makes it real for me. And so if you give, throughout your curriculum, little stories that, even from your own life, that contextualize these pieces the students are going to struggle with, and where those struggle points are because you see it, you've done this enough to know. So use those stories regularly. Start your lessons off with a story, or intersperse it somewhere in the middle, so these kids start to really kind of hang on that. It'll make a huge difference, and you won't have to do it every time, because by doing it once, you'll have very few who won't understand it.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about some things we've been working on in the gym, and basically what you're describing is the why, right? Which is ultimately, without that, you're leaving this gap in how people learn, retain, process, all of that, right? And so ultimately thinking through, for those of you that are listening as a basketball coach, right, trying to teach a secondary finishing move without explaining the why or even telling the story, right? Hey, you've caught the ball, you've ripped, you've attacked past the primary defender, and all of a sudden somebody steps up. What now, right? And now you can layer on, these are your options. Makes a lot more sense in regards to how you would utilize this, or how we already do utilize this within the framework of teaching the curriculum. So that was super helpful in how you described that. How would you take this idea of the Thought Academy, right? The Thought Leader Academy, if I remember exactly what that was titled. Yep. And help people who may be they're just casual participants, or they're playing their role, and they don't necessarily feel that their ideas are going to land or be received, or be asked for, right? How do you take what you're teaching them, Thought Leader Academy, to help people develop the confidence to share some of these concepts, or when they maybe feel that they're overstepping by making suggestions? How do you help grow that? What strategies can you offer there?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we work on all the time, because most of the people who come into the Thought Leader Academy are, in some way feeling like that either what they have to share is too complex, no one will understand it, or it's not really valuable for everyone for mass consumption. And a big part of that, I talk about this a lot, which is we need a diversity of thought leadership. We need more thought leaders, and we need more diverse thought leaders. Why? Well, we have to go, all we have to do is look at nature. When we look at nature, we know that diverse ecosystems thrive. And when we think about thought leadership, when we look around, thought leaders are the change makers in our world. They're the ones that actually implement change. And who do we think of as thought leaders? Often they're leaders of countries or leaders of companies or leaders of industry or leaders of communities. And when we look around, often those people are not necessarily reflective of all the people they're serving.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with their thinking. They have good thinking. It's just not complete.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I often talk about is that every voice is actually like an element of an ecosystem. I was actually just writing about this, which is, there's the example of Yellowstone Park. I don't know if you know the story of Yellowstone Park and the wolves.
Mm-hmm.
And what we found, the wolves were removed from Yellowstone Park, and the park began to die. Why? It needed predators. Well, it's similar. Like, imagine your voice as being the wolves. When it's removed, we've lost something.
Mm-hmm.
If it was never there, the ecosystem probably would never have flourished.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're looking at helping people to understand that their voice matters, that their ideas matter, that's where we start. It's about diversity. It's not about being right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is it's unique. Every one of us has a unique take on something. And this as a coach, that often every person within the team needs to learn in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll learn, when they see they may watch another kid, taking a shot in a way, and suddenly they're like, I'd never thought of doing it that way. And they now learn that and they do it in that way. Well, if that first kid had never gotten on the team, that other kid wouldn't have learned that, or may have taken longer to learn it, to see somebody else do it. And that's the point with using our voice.
Mm-hmm.
When we share how we think, because each one of us comes at our thinking from a completely unique perspective, because we've got different backgrounds, we've got different cultures, we've got different educational systems. There's so much about us that's different.
Mm-hmm.
We're inspiring others to think differently as well. And so, using our voice, and when we have people coming into the Thought Leader Academy, that's the first thing, is like, not about being right or wrong. There is no such thing as being right or wrong. It's actually about using what you know in a way that others can hear it and understand it. If you've done that, you've done your job as an aspiring thought leader.
Mm-hmm.
Who that helps, and you may only become a thought leader of your community. Great. You don't need to be the president or the leader of whatever. You can be a thought leader within your family, and that's enough. So it's understanding, and it's understanding that we all have a role to play. What that role is will be determined by our own ability to show up, to do the work, and to take the shots that we want to take, mm-hmm. and that we're ready to take. We'll go as far as we actually want to go. Mm-hmm. So don't be afraid of that, because that's up to you, but you have to at least start.
Mm-hmm. So then how do you, as the leader of the space, create and hold the space for those voices to be heard, right? What's the best way for people that want new ideas, want this information to come, but yet it's not coming for whatever reason? Maybe because I'm not creating the space, maybe because I haven't cultivated the confidence and trust and leadership in these individuals to share that information. So if you are in the role of leading a particular space, what's the best way to create the atmosphere so that these ideas do percolate and flow?
Well, and that's the coaching environment. I mean, that's what we do in a coaching environment. Sometimes it's one-on-one, sometimes it's a group coaching environment. But what we're doing is we're establishing that trust environment. We're creating a space that's open for creativity. And what we do as coaches is we pull that out of the individual. We're helping them to find within themselves those ideas and that thinking. it's there. It's always there. It's often blocked by their own limiting thoughts and limiting beliefs and the stories that they're telling themselves. So we pull it out and we give it back to them. So, what we're often doing is listening and composing and then saying it back to them so they can hear it. So then they can take it and use it and use their own voice. But it often is so that space is such an important piece of that sort of thought leadership process, because it's what our society just doesn't do, which is give us the space to think, to create. And when we think of creativity, we're often thinking of artistic outputs. But if you think of creativity from an intellectual standpoint or from a thinking standpoint, it is just as creative as an artistic output, and it is as elusive to find.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, that's always the balance you're trying to strike, right? Is where you want feedback, you want opinions, and at the same time, creating the atmosphere where the information flow goes back and forth while you are acknowledging everybody's baggage or hesitation around that. So that's the perfect balance that you're trying to strike. So if people are more interested in what work you do, where can they find you? Where can they tap in, maybe get some lessons and grow this part of their ability?
Yeah, so you know what? Follow me on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Instagram. So YouTube, you can find us under the Thought Leader Academy, LinkedIn under my name, Andrea Sampson, and also visit our website, talkboutique.com. And you can book in with me directly, set up a discovery call. I'd love to meet you.
All right. Well, that's great resources where they can find you. Hopefully, people tap in and reach out. I know this has been beneficial for me. I appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks so much, Justin. I've really enjoyed it.